Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. To celebrate Halloween I have decided to produce a video covering a game befitting of such an occasion. Castlevania is a franchise that is synonymous with things that go bump in the night, and as a result these spooky themed games are ideal play experiences for All Hallows Eve. Fans over time have grown to love this series for its epic platforming combined with memorable creepy environments. Whether you're wielding a whip in one of the more simplistic 8-bit games, or are enjoying a romp through Dracula's castle in the more modern non-linear jaunts, Castlevania has enough quality and diversity to provide fun for many. Whilst on the whole fans of the franchise have had many great moments, as with most brands there have still been disappointments here and there. For example, few enjoyed Castlevania's appearances on the Nintendo 64, or Lord of Shadows 2 for the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3. Each of these titles gets a lot of hate due to their flaws and mechanical failings. However, some Castlevania games are simply disliked for trying something different. Today we are going to be covering a game that falls into the latter category, a title that ditched action platforming altogether in favour of one-on-one fighting. This is certainly not a Castlevania game that fans expected, nor particularly wanted. But just because it is vastly different to what came before it, does that make it a bad game that could not connect with its fanbase? This, ladies and gentlemen, is the mad story of Castlevania Judgement, the overhated fighting game. Yeah! To start today's story off, we need to go way back to 1986. With the release of the original Castlevania games developed by Konami for the Nintendo Famicom Disk System and MSX2 computers. Castlevania was directed by Hitotoshi Akamatsu, an admirer of cinema. Akamatsu approached projects with a film director's eye and said the visuals and music for Castlevania were made by people who consciously wanted to do something cinematic. When it comes to this game, he wanted players to feel like they were inside a classic horror film. In Japan, the franchise was known under its original name, Akamajo Dracula, but it would soon receive its international name of Castlevania, under the leadership of Konami of America's Senior Vice President Emil Heidkamp. Heidkamp despised the game's original name, stating its translation to be Dracula's Satanic Castle, and it had too many religious connotations in the West. So the name Castlevania was coined to coincide with the 90th anniversary of Bram Stoker's Dracula. Fast forward and the Castlevania brand would slowly morph into a juggernaut, receiving countless game releases and even an animated Netflix show, with the 4th series being in development as we speak. The franchise has had its highs and lows, but as discussed earlier, we'll be focusing on neither of these areas today, and instead we'll be looking at the Castlevania fighting game. In 2008, briefly after a patent for the Nintendo DS game Castlevania Order of Ecclesia had been discovered, it appeared that a secondary patent had been found for a game named Castlevania Judgement. News and rumours at the time had indicated that Konami were keen to make a Castlevania exclusive for the Xbox 360, due to the platform's massive success in the United States. These rumours, though, were soon squashed when Nintendo Power revealed that Castlevania Judgement would in fact be an exclusive for the Nintendo Wii. The article would outline that characters in the game would be designed by Takeshi Obata, the same gentleman behind the character design in Death Note. The game would be produced by Koji Igarashi, a man who had worked on the series since Symphony of the Night. On the project he worked on scenario writing and programming, although halfway through the game's production, director Toru Hagihara received a company promotion, which promoted Igarashi to assistant director to complete the game. Now a producer, Igarashi tried to put fans' minds at rest with regards to the fighting game deviation in the series. In the lead up to Judgement, he stated, "I guess some fans may worry about the game quality, but I am confident that we can achieve a very high quality game. I think that fans will see that it stays true to the Castlevania series. Even though this is a fighting game, I can guarantee that it will be fun. Early glimpses of the game confirmed that well-known characters from the franchise such as Simon Belmont, Alucard and even Dracula himself would all be a part of this game, along with a number of recurring enemies and bosses too from the classics. In Igarashi's plans for this game, he would also mention that an additional purpose of bringing the game to the Wii was to utilise the system's unique motion sensing controllers, but admitted that to do this correctly they would need to get a lot of things right. Igarashi thought that using motion controls in a prolonged adventure story like Castlevania of old would be very tiring, since much of the franchise's gameplay involves whipping and swinging, so to take advantage of the Wii's unique selling point, he thought it would be wise to drop the traditional formula on the Wii. He hypothesised that in a fighting game setting, the swinging motion could be broken up with resting intervals, and thus become more enjoyable. The aim with Castlevania Judgement would be marrying up fighting and motion controls with the gothic feel of the franchise. In terms of the game's development, I must admit that a desperate thirst to use the motion controls the Wii had and take advantage of the system's high sales numbers does not feel like the most wholesome of reasons to drastically change the direction of a franchise. It very much seems that we got a Castlevania fighting game specifically due to the Wii's existence, rather than simply because Igarashi thought fighting would be a good match for the franchise. As expected, when this game was first announced, reactions would be a mix of shock and skepticism with regards to the different direction for the brand. After the title was shown at the 2008 Tokyo Game Show, Kotaku even wrote a long article about the game, with a journalist who attended the event reporting that he walked away from the show feeling bad for Castlevania fans, stating nothing seemed right about the game. Igarashi though would object to these judgments, referring to them as unfair. So with the game swirling in controversy from the get-go, what did this game bring to the table on release? Let's discuss. Whilst the game introduces a variety of play modes, which we will soon get to, at its heart Judgement is a game that belongs in the 3D arena fighting game subgenre, along with the likes of other games we have covered on this channel before, such as Power Stone and Airgites. Judgement presents a game in this 3D fighting arena niche, mixed with Castlevania tropes such as the characters, the setting and even sub-weapons and hearts. Action in this game, as suggested earlier, attempts to take full advantage of the Wii's controls. For example, players can perform combos using the Wiimote. It is possible to execute different combos via holding down different buttons on the remote and combining it with various waggles. Effort was made with the game to ensure that it was not possible to win by simply swinging the controls wildly. For example, players are able to dodge with the nunchuck, as well as block with the Z button. On top of this, players can also perform powerful but slow unblockable moves, which can be used to break guards, as well as chain these into combos along with the B and Z buttons. In these 3D fighting arenas, players can freely move around, and each fighter can take advantage of utilising a different weapon. And further to this, different types of weapons are available depending on the stage and interactive environment. Speaking of weapons, characters can use classic Castlevania hearts to power up their sub-weapons, as well as use their magic bar to fuel special abilities and special attacks. It is also possible to set traps or use monsters within the stages to attack one another. Throughout combat, also non-playable characters roam the game's stages, serving as obstacles that can be eliminated to replenish energy. These characters include common Castlevania enemies such as zombies, mermen and minotaurs. If you are like most modern gamers, you probably do not like the concept of motion controls. Thankfully, despite this game being programmed to function with these style commands integrated, we can still switch motion off and play using a Wii Classic controller or a GameCube one, meaning the title can be experienced in a more traditional fashion. Diversity and action in the game itself can be found through the unique mix of fighters that Judgement brings to us, that tends to handle charge attacks and supers differently from character to character. Speaking of this lineup, we have a cast of characters who have been plucked from various Castlevania games of the past, which is interesting considering that the Castlevania timeline stretches over 1,000 years, meaning that many of these characters never coexisted at the same times. The game's plot though does a good job of explaining why we have the characters in this game that we do, as the story suggests that Galamoth and his servant, the Time Reaper, from 10 millennia in the future, arrive in the past to destroy his rival Dracula and change history. In relation to this tale, this is where the game's brand new character comes into the fold, known as Aeon. Aeon is a man who unearths what is going on, so pulls together champions from different eras of history into a time rift in order to find a chosen one capable of destroying the Time Reaper. This means that each of the game's playable fighters have their own unique storyline, cutscenes and ending sequence when playing through the game's story mode. Rather than going down dozens of different rabbit holes trying to explain where each of these characters fall chronologically into the Castlevania timeline, it's probably more simple to comment a bit with regards to how some of these fighters function. Amongst the lineup we have of course the legendary Simon Belmont himself, who is a nice all-round fighter capable of multiple different whip attacks, functioning as one of the game's most balanced fighters. We then have the likes of Trevor Belmont, who is heavier and slower but more powerful and can use more magic moves than Simon. Maria is present in the game too, who uses a heavily magic based defence. We then have Alucard and Eric Lecard, who fight with slow yet very powerful spears, and Camilla and Cornell, who can teleport and use distance attacks. Further to this, we of course have Count Dracula himself, who is very slow but can use insanely powerful magic, along with many more characters who you would have noticed throughout watching the gameplay displayed today. As mentioned earlier, action in this game is experienced through a range of play modes. Firstly, we have a story mode that pits the players against multiple opponents that they must defeat, and at the end of a round of story mode, the character Aeon can be heard saying he accepts the character's soul key and lets a player know how many they must get to unlock the true story mode. Through story mode, more characters are unlocked, with the game only allowing players to play as Simon Belmont or Alucard to begin with. Finishing story mode with all the characters except Aeon will unlock true story mode. True story mode now features a second battle against Aeon in the Clock Tower and a final boss battle against the Time Reaper in the Dimensional Rift. If players beat this challenge, it unlocks character respective artwork and theme songs in the gallery. The game also offers an arcade, survival and versus mode, which all function in ways you would literally expect. What we have not yet mentioned though is the game's castle mode, where the player has to enter different rooms and complete the challenges to progress in the castle until they face Dracula. Every room contains either a challenge or a save point, and challenges consist of breaking items, killing monsters, bosses and facing off against other characters. Whilst defunct now, like other Wii services, at one point in time players could also use Nintendo Wi-Fi to play against others online, and even connect to the Nintendo DS game Castlevania Order of Ecclesia to unlock bonus content in both games. In Judgment's case, it would let players play as Aeon and Shinoa, along with allowing gamers to use new accessories in matches. So that's pretty much what you could do with this game, but how was this game actually received? Let's look at some reviews from 2008. IGN stated, "In the list of games I'm dying to play in the Castlevania series, a 3D fighter was about as far from the top as possible, but Judgment was a pleasant surprise. The combat is deep and entertaining, the characters well balanced and very unique as a full-on roster, and everything from sub-weapons to specials, combo attacks, in-level traps and monsters, and epic super attack animations are well done, and true to the source material. When I first went hands-on with the game, it felt like a lacking fighter that had only fan service to bank on. The final product is far from that, being a fun fighter on its own accord, and a game that will do most of the fan base proud, despite being such an odd choice for Wii's first Castlevania. There are a few needed fixes in the design, such as the out of control camera, but the end result is a surprisingly fun and undeniably unique take on one of Konami's oldest franchises." Whilst IGN gave this game time of day and were genuinely happy with their Judgment experience, GameSpot on the other hand were way more judgmental when it came to the title. They would publish that Castlevania's switch from 2D side-scrolling to 3D fighting is an endless stream of missteps that will frustrate even series devotees. Judgment is a mishmash of dull gameplay made up of disparate bits and pieces of various games, strung together with tragically applied motion-controlled attacks. The poor execution on such a high potential premise will frustrate you from your very first fight until the moment you throw in the towel. The unforgivable flaws drain nearly every ounce of enjoyment from the fighter, and whatever aspiration it had falls flat on its face. The abhorrent camera, dreadful art and cumbersome controls are for masochistic applicants only. Fans of the franchise, fighting or fun, will find nothing of value in this sloppy caching. As you can see from these two reviews, reception for Judgment was like chalk and cheese. Reviewers seemed to love it or hate it. When it comes to love though, IGN would nominate it as the best fighting game for the Wii in 2008, and Nintendo Power stated that, in spite of being radically different from its action-adventure predecessors, Castlevania Judgement is actually pretty fun, praising its presentation, accessibility and remixed music. But at the other end of the scale, we have entities like XPlay, who only gave it a 1 out of 5, calling it an enormously unbalanced game with an awful control scheme that bastardised established Castlevania designs. The game would go on to sell absolutely terribly, which I guess kind of makes sense considering it is a Castlevania game from a completely different genre than the franchise's fans would have actually wanted. Apart from Judgement being a fighting game, even the character designs heavily lean towards a style most commonly seen in contemporary generic anime, which makes this title drift even further from what Castlevania fans were comfortable with. Despite some of this game's heavy criticism, poor sales and deviation from the source material, as you can see from Nintendo Power and IGN's reactions to this game, it really isn't that bad. The game pretty much functions as it was advertised to from the beginning. It's an arena fighter with a cast of Castlevania characters in a gothic setting. It does nothing to set the world on fire, but it certainly does not deserve the level of hate some journalists decided to plough on this game. It almost feels like they reviewed this game so negatively, in part due to the response that this game was not an action platformer, like they and the fans of the series actually wanted. But I guess that's just my opinion. The game very much seems to be overhated for a fairly novel arena fighter, with worse bastardizations of famous gaming franchises certainly taking place in the past. With regards to this game, I would be interested to hear from you all with regards to what you think of this game, and whether or not that you think this game deserves to actually exist, or for that matter, receive the heavy criticism that it's got in the past. Feel free to all cast your judgments now. So, ladies and gentlemen, that was the mad story of Castlevania Judgement, the overhated fighting game. For weekly fighting game content, make sure you hit that damn subscribe button as I upload a different video like this every Thursday. These videos are possible due to the generous people who back this channel on Patreon, so shout outs go out to Sebastian Velez, Carl Johnson, A Murder of Crows, Heo Paulo Lopez, Joseph Rasmick, Luke Samuel Denton, Corey Imar Sr., Capcom vs SNK, BXL Gotham, Rowan Dinched, Evan Balder, Philip Manth, Cambo Rambo 82, Azra Rarakai, Keith Ferguson, Joaquin Varela, Prince Knight, Michael Cullix, Ago, Jordan Durant, TOG Driver, Angel Light 85, Alethea Swanson, Timothy W. Haskins II, Nick Daniels, Princess Zana, Glennie Glenn, Daniel Daly, Computer Man, House of the Ted, Sponge Matt B, Gary Pinkett, ECU Professor, Aaron McNamara, Instant Gratification Monkey, Man Shovel, James Bishop, JB, Posty XL, Michael Hall, Wesley Sanghi, Ben Slightly, Langston Miller, New, Brian Barry, Stephen Lewis, Sarah Powell, Flaming Renee, Marvin Araliga, Chris Cool, Adrian Hannington, Bernard NG, Richard Stu Stewart, James McDonald, Crazy Yarl, Dan Van Dammit, Adam Castin, Louis Viant, John Bates, David Bauer, Chris Fisk, Paul Elliott, Lee Machine Dean, Mike Bruno, Rick67, Antonio Rodriguez, Hans Christian, Craig Jenkins, Tom Elliott, Retroverse.com, Casey Wright, Synth Spaces, Zai, Andrew Bazansky, Gunther Hendricks and everyone else who backs my channel. Thank you very much for continuing to support what I do. Yeah. Cheerio.